Overcoming the effects of childhood PTSD, it's not easy, and it's not a road I'd choose for anyone, but if that's the hand that life dealt you, it is possible for you to blossom into a life of depth and love and purpose. Now, resilience is often mentioned as the thing that explains why some people go through rough childhoods but seem to rise above all the harsh outcomes that are common and normal. And I think it's tempting for some people to think that resilient people are just extra clever or that they have a special kind of DNA. And you know, we are all different. But resilience is something that we can all practice. It's a frame of mind we can develop. It's like a muscle that makes us strong enough to face the obstacles that abuse and trauma placed in our lives, and then walk around them. Now, some people worry that trying to be strong means denying what happened, but I don't see strength that way. Developing a strength never requires denial or pretending everything's fine. In fact, strength just allows us to have those traumas be true and keep growing anyway, so that we can honestly be ourselves with all the wounds and all the brilliance and become the people we were meant to be. And this is the way, not with fake smiles and platitudes, but with honesty, that life starts getting really good. So this is the first video in a series I'm making about resilience, and it's kind of an overview, and I want to tell you about 8 strengths that anyone can work on to get better at dealing with the obstacles that are so common for people with childhood trauma. First, I'll talk about the obstacle fear. Yes, all people have fear, and yes, sometimes it's appropriate, but I'm talking about another kind of fear, the free-floating hamster wheel kind of fear that runs through our heads and keeps us small and stuck. And I know if you have childhood PTSD, you know exactly what I'm talking about. The word for that is still fear. And lots of people talk about it, but in my video on fear, I'll show you what to actually do with fear so that you have less of that. I'll teach you the strength that allows you to get free like that. I'm telling you, if you're not subscribed to this channel now, this would be a good time to do that so that you get to see this whole series. The second obstacle I'm going to cover in the series is sickness, the physical depletion, the little aches and pains and the increased incidence in adulthood of serious diseases in people who had higher than normal levels of stress in their lives as children. The strength I'll teach you around this is self-care, not flowers and rainbows and bubble bath, but a common sense commitment to get the sleep, food, and exercise you need to help keep the symptoms of childhood PTSD more controlled. The third obstacle I'll talk about is paralysis. Have you had that? Where you're just unable sometimes to take the most obvious common sense action, even when you know it's the right thing to do, like leave a destructive relationship, or even little things like getting to work on time. If you struggle with taking action, this is really important. It's a good video for you to watch. They all are, but this one is here to remind you that you don't have to have massive plans for transformation. You just have to start taking action. Action is a strength, even if it's just one action to get things moving a little bit again. And remember, all accomplishment in your life started in the same way, with one action. The fourth obstacle is avoidance. So whereas in paralysis we want to take action but don't, with avoidance we don't want to take action and we don't. From the outside, people think it's always just laziness, but sometimes when you have childhood PTSD, showing up and taking responsibility can be so overwhelming that we risk falling apart in front of everyone. And of course, part of us wants to avoid things, so the strength here is showing up. We don't have to take everything on. We can start by just showing up and staying connected with life and with groups if they'll have us. Participation is how we grow on every level. And when we're out there participating, guess what? We're included. The fifth obstacle is confusion. Now, those of us who experienced abuse and neglect when we were little often have a terrible time detecting which people are good for us to open up to and count on, and which ones are unreliable or unavailable or even abusive. This is the biggest reason that so many of us end up in painful relationships or making mistakes that are mortifying to us. We inherited confusion from the chaos at home. It's totally not our fault, but now we need clarity. And to see clearly, we'll need to cultivate strength in discernment. If you keep working on discernment, it might take a little while for all the problems to get moved out of your life, but you're going to start doing a really good job in not letting new problems in. The sixth obstacle is loneliness, and this one is the most pervasive and the most painful obstacle of them all. And no, we are not the only people to feel isolated and lonely. It's common for all too many people, but given the way that complex PTSD and childhood PTSD can harm our ability to connect with people, we are very much in need of a strength that builds that connection. And that strength is love. And we'll dive into love in that video too. The seventh obstacle is discouragement. Now, a lot of people who experienced early trauma have come to view their symptoms as permanent, their healing as hopeless, but that is never true. Healing is always possible, and the strength that helps us stay with every bit of healing that happens is gratitude. And gratitude helps us accept and incorporate our progress and to stoke the flame of hope inside. When hope shows up in my heart after a rough period, I want to run to the rooftop and say, thank you, thank you. Gratitude and hope are like a full tank of gas with your whole life ahead of you. The eighth obstacle and final video in this resilience series is emptiness, which almost always arises when we're so consumed with our grief and fear that we lose sight of our purpose. So what do I mean by that? Everyone is born with gifts to bring to the world, and we will not be truly happy until we find that purpose, that gift, and use it for the benefit of everyone. Purposefulness is the strength at the top of the mountain. It builds on all the other strengths to bring fulfillment and goodness and usefulness to our lives, and that is the sweet spot where all this healing leads. 8 inner obstacles, and today I want to start with the first one, the mother of them all, that can keep us looping in the side effects of trauma, and it's fear. Now, this is not some lecture where I tell you, just don't have fear. That's not how it works. This is about where fear comes from, what it really does to us, and it's worse than you think, and what to actually do to get free of your fear. Because no one tells you that. Have you noticed? Lots and lots of celebrities and athletes and self-help gurus tell you not to have fear. And it sounds so appealing, but when you have childhood PTSD, you're like, I can't just let go of my fear. And then you start to think, there must be something really deeply wrong with me. And there's nothing wrong with you. You have PTSD, which is a normal reaction to trauma in childhood. What works for other people, maybe you noticed it's like water running through your fingers. Nothing happens. It can't even touch the problem inside because the problem is something different. And so if you're like me, you have tried and tried to just act normal, to handle yourself with less anxiety and panic and more confidence to just get out there and try things and meet people and enjoy yourself. But PTSD is hard. And when the symptoms are happening, people are so stressful to be around. And that's kind of what used to drive my whole life before I recovered. I was terrified, and I'm not sure everybody knew it, not if they hadn't known me for a while, but they'd find out soon enough. I wanted to be around people, and I had a whole way of acting lighthearted, and I would pretend to be tough, probably too tough. And I tried to be funny, and actually I probably was kind of funny, and for a while I would have people fooled. They thought maybe I was kind of insensitive, but they believed that I was confident. Now, appearing confident is not the end-all be-all of being awesome, by the way. The thing about convincing people that you have it all together is that they can't see when you need help. You don't get the support you need, and if you try to go without help, and then you hit your limit all of a sudden and you start yelling and demanding that people help you now, that also doesn't work all that well, and you're not going to get the support that you need. The worst thing about fear, and I don't mean the useful kind of fear that gets you out of danger or that helps you be realistic about things, I mean the kind of fear that keeps you trapped in your mind, worried about random possibilities in the future, tripping about what people think about you, or worrying about what they're about to do, fearing you're not good enough. This kind of fear is essentially a fantasy. And living in a fantasy means you're not living in reality. And reality is where you have to be if you want to actually love people and be loved and solve real problems and feel good about yourself and serve the world. Living in a scared fantasy that everything's bad and people are out to get you means you're not really here. And if you feel like your life is passing you by, this could be why. This was definitely what was happening for me. There was this one day, and my whole life is divided between the time before that day and then after that day, when this woman I knew asked if I wanted her to show me how to get rid of fear. And it's funny, I needed that so badly, but I was defensive. I didn't quite understand that fear was what was driving me almost 100% back then. I was walking around terrified all the time that any moment people were going to pull away from me for reasons I didn't even know. Maybe I was inappropriate somehow, or hurt their feelings, or was too needy, or I don't know. Maybe I was awful. But having my brain and emotions dysregulated all the time from childhood PTSD made it really hard for me to just know what was what, or to be aware of my effect on other people, or to act appropriately. And I could see it by the expression on people's faces. I'd be like, did I just say something wrong? And that's one of the hardest things about the effect of early trauma is you don't know. You don't have a normal sense of what's weird and what's okay. So I have some good news. You don't have to live like this. You are not broken forever, and in fact, you have a real self inside under all that fear who knows exactly who you are and what you came to do. You know that. You've always known that. This is what happened to you, and then this is you. And the part that's overwhelming you is not so much what happened to you, but it's all the fear you have about what that means for you. Fear it's a terrible world. Fear you'll be damaged forever. Fear no one cares. Whatever it is. The thing that happened, it's over. Your fear about what it means lives on, and this fear is not your friend. This fear is consuming and limiting, and until you get free, it's like a belief system that, oh yeah, you're one of the abused people, and that is what you are. The abuse and neglect happened, but they are not you. You are not damaged forever. You are not broken. You are not pitiful. You are not a magnet for crazy people. You are not your trauma. What happened to you is so sad, and it's real, but it's not you. Your story began long before that stuff happened, and it will go on a really long time after you get free. And this way of getting free that I'm going to show you is very gentle. It works over time. It's free, and you get to keep control over the process. Now, sometimes you're going to have to keep doing these techniques again and again before you make progress, but a lot of the time, you'll get a big burst of freedom like right then and there. So it happens quickly and slowly at the same time, and the result is that you get to be right here where you belong, freer, stronger, and more your true self. And when you have less fear, your whole life opens up to good things. All that love inside you can be shared more, and it's not all bogged down with sadness and craving to get that caretaking you never got enough of. You might find you feel more self-contained and content and not so out of control. And if you keep this up, next thing you know, your natural talents and gifts begin to show themselves. And that is where the joy begins. You sharing what you came here to give. You being yourself and not taking any more crap. You free with more connection and less fear. Now, more connection and less fear means more freedom to make mistakes if you want to, because you know that if you screw up, you'll just get free again. I used to think self-care was just hot baths and chocolate for people whose problems were so small that they would actually solve them with chocolate. But 25 years of continuous healing and strength building has taught me that while it's true that self-care by itself probably won't heal childhood PTSD, it makes healing more possible, and it definitely makes it more sustainable. Now, how many times have you had some healing breakthrough from a book or a retreat or a new healing technique or a new boyfriend, and then within like 3 days, you're feeling more dysregulated and dysfunctional than ever? For me, so many times, because I made the mistake of thinking that the new thing du jour was going to be the whole fix for all time. Now, wouldn't that be nice if everything would just be okay forever, right? But that's not how healing works. Recovery from childhood PTSD doesn't happen because of one-time treatments. It happens because of multiple things that you use consistently over time. It's not a pill you take. It's more like a stack of pancakes. And here's what I mean. You probably know how important it is that you get adequate sleep, for example. And this would be true even if you'd never had any trauma at all. A lack of sleep not only wears us down physically, but degrades our cognition, weakens our ability to self-regulate emotionally, and amplifies virtually all the problems associated with early trauma, like depression, addiction, anxiety, and even heart disease and cancer. So If you get only a little sleep one night, and that's the only thing that's going wrong for you, you're probably going to be fine. But if you had a day where you had no exercise and you ate a bunch of bread and ice cream and no protein and you watched 5 hours of TV and had 4 glasses of wine and had an argument with your partner, and then you lost a couple hours of sleep, then the lack of sleep could be the last pancake on your stack. And that's the thing on top of everything else that pushes you over the edge into being a mess, with yelling and dissociation and tears and then 2 full days of brain fog and the clumsiness that goes with that, and all of that before you feel like yourself again. And it's hard to know what sets you off because whichever is the last pancake on the stack is different every time. The trigger is actually the full stack of pancakes, and that's what you want to pay attention to, because health problems can be a huge obstacle to healing. You know that vigorous exercise is one of the most powerful healing strategies available for PTSD, but you can't do it when you feel terrible from bad food and bad sleep or when you're sick. And I know this better than you might think. It becomes a vicious circle because if you're trying to do your life day after day under the burden of a fairly large bunch of health stressors, which I'm calling pancakes, the dysregulation you're feeling is probably also happening at the level of your nervous system. And you can't feel that necessarily, but it's making you sick. The increased rates of disease from childhood PTSD is well known and it's measurable. And the more trauma you had as a kid, the higher the probability that you'll bump into serious health problems as an adult. Not just the problems you'd expect to be risks for traumatized people like depression, addiction, anxiety, and behavioral things, but diabetes, obesity, heart disease, autoimmune disease, cancer, chronic pain, migraines, strokes. And please don't internalize this as your inevitable fate. It's not your fate. Your risk is higher, but not everyone is affected, and what you can do to lower your risk right now is heal from childhood PTSD. And this means mastering re-regulation, changing the things in your life that are beating you down, and taking beautiful, imperfect, but substantial care of yourself. Now, I get this in comments a lot. People say, oh, it's so easy for you to heal because you have no idea how bad it is for me, what I go through. Well, to those people, I say, yes, I know, and if you think I haven't been at the bottom of the totem pole and stuck in hospitals and broke and sick and sad and hopeless, you just haven't heard enough of my story. Every person is different, but where you see me today is not where I always was, and where you are now doesn't have to be where you always stay. Everybody procrastinates sometimes, but for people who experienced abuse and neglect in childhood, procrastinating can morph into a paralysis of sorts. I've had this happen. I've spent whole seasons in this place before, and I'll tell you, it is so demoralizing when it's happening to know that you're here in this world to do something good, but something in you is not letting you do it. So what is that, and how can we change? In this video, which is part of my series on resilience for people with childhood PTSD, I want to talk about one of the strengths that helps us overcome the big obstacles that can hold us back. And in this video, the obstacle we're looking at is paralysis. We literally find ourselves unable to take positive action on our own behalf, both in little day-to-day things and in big matters affecting our whole life path. So what's going on when we can't act? Honestly, I think that doing things, committing ourselves, spending energy, creating something out of nothing, it's hard. I love sharing videos with you, but the week before I shoot them each month, I'm dying of avoidance because making these videos takes days of preparation, probably about 6 to 8 hours of focused creative work for each video. And when it's time to plan the content, oh my gosh, I suddenly just get so interested in balancing my checkbook and cleaning my sandals and buying some new hair clips online. And it makes no sense because releasing these videos is the great joy of my life, but doing the work that leads up to that moment is hard. For people with childhood PTSD, especially when there's a lot of unhealed stuff, you're in a state of stress pretty much all the time, everything is hard. And people who don't have childhood PTSD have no idea how much work it is for some of us just to do ordinary things. It's exhausting and it's stressful. People are hard. Sticking to a schedule is hard. Expressing yourself is hard. Making money is hard. But you know what's harder? Not doing these things. And that's why I don't recommend you make a big accommodation for yourself and tell yourself that the solution is to just avoid everything that's stressful for you. Because in the end, the path of least resistance is to do these things anyway. That's how they get easier, and that's how you get happier. Okay, if you have childhood PTSD, maybe it doesn't make sense to just run out there and go for it and force yourself to do everything at once. Maybe it's just a little at a time. But I'll tell you what the solution is not. The solution is not to give up on yourself. Don't identify with the trauma and mistake paralysis for self-care. Your strength lies in action. Action taken in right proportion to your capacity. Don't wait until it feels right for you to start brushing your teeth. Just take that one step and do it, even when you're tired, just for practice, just to stretch yourself. And then the next day, I don't know, clean the kitchen. You know the good actions that you need to be taking next. You may have to push yourself, not like a maniac, but you might have to push yourself some every day. You know that saying you hear sometimes about not being a human doing, but being a human being? Well, it's a good sentiment, but doing and being are both really important. And doing is how we earn a living, and it's how we express ourselves. How are you going to become fully yourself if you don't do things? The more I heal, the more there's things I want to do. Like creating Crappy Childhood Fairy was on my mind for 20 years before I had the inner power to do it. And I'm so glad I did. It's a lot of work on nights and weekends, and I'll tell you, part of me would really rather be watching Netflix. Really, I love this era of great television and streaming shows, and it bums me out that I can't watch more of it. But I'd be even more unhappy if I knew that I could be the Crappy Childhood Fairy, but I didn't make the effort. And that is what it feels like to have life pass you by. So I take action, and I encourage you to take action too. Like all the strengths in my Resilience series, action is something that you can begin immediately and do a little every day. Big bursts of action, they're nice, but even better are small, consistent actions. They get you there too, but they give you just a little breather between actions so that you can equilibrate, you can balance yourself out and handle the stress that life gives you every time you put yourself out there with action. Small actions taken consistently are like super vitamins for childhood PTSD. If you were constrained from letting your light shine in your life, your spirit is going to love this. You're getting somewhere, and accomplishment feels really good. When we keep taking small actions every day, adventure follows. You may or may not reach the goal. You may not even want the goal in the end, but the act of taking small steps towards it will increase your feeling of being alive and open up your life to all kinds of unexpected connections and possibilities. You're in the game. You're open for business. Your strength is action. It's super common for those of us who grew up with abuse and neglect when we were small to feel as adults that we're on the outside somehow. We feel like we're on the outside of groups, kind of part in and part out, but never truly included. Or we start as a full participant, but we pull away over time. We uninclude ourselves. And the telltale sign that this could be a personal choice, even when it doesn't feel like it, is that we're almost always at about the same distance from the center. Like in my case, I used to always like to settle about 80% out from the center. And if I got motivated and moved toward the center of the group, maybe took on a more active role, got involved, sooner or later, usually sooner, I was highly likely to find some reason to bounce out of the group altogether. Being part of something was, and in some areas of my life still is, really uncomfortable for me. Do you have that? I used to think it was just one episode of bad luck after another. Oh dear, I guess I joined the wrong group. And I never saw that it was a consistent pattern for me until I had a lot of healing from dysregulation and started to have some clarity. And it makes sense that being in a group when you have the sensitivities of childhood PTSD, it can be too much. And dealing with a lot of people, it can be like an assault on your senses. It gets really emotional. It's like high school that never ends. And childhood PTSD is not the same thing as introversion, but I suspect there are similarities in that being social with people can take more energy than it gives because we're just working so hard to deal. So it's natural that we'd gravitate to groups, but toward the outer edges. It's a little more manageable. We can be around people and be social a little bit, but just keep one foot out the door in case we need to get the heck out of there. And avoiding full participation like this would be fantastic if it worked long term, but the problem is that peripheral relationships to groups make it really hard to develop social skills. And what starts as kind of a delay in our development can become a full-on deficiency. And next thing you know, we're becoming that old neighbor who stands at the window banging on the glass to scare the kids away from his driveway. That is how it happens. And when we're not connecting and risking ourselves or having the normal ups and downs of being in friendships and groups, we not only don't get included anymore, but we can start to get hard to include, if you know what I mean. And what that is, and this will sound harsh, but we get self-centered. Not sharing ourselves with other people is an emergency protection measure, but not a way to live our whole lives. The possibility of sharing ourselves is all around us. And whether it's you're bringing a dish to a potluck dinner, which I think in the UK is called a porridge party, or if you decide to join a choir or take a parenting class, or you invite friends out for a hike, when we show up for people in our lives, we grow less fragile and more flexible and more connected and more included. Yes, it's demanding to be included, and isolation sounds so peaceful as an option, but if we allow isolation to take root long term, it will take over, and our very worst traits will have a field day. We grow crabby, we get self-centered, we get bitter, we get paranoid, and then it gets harder to turn the ship back toward connection again, because, frankly, we've gotten too weird. Have you ever felt this beginning to happen to you? So take your alone time and then keep chipping away at your capacity to stay connected. Because remember in the video where I talk about the worst fear that everyone shares, and I know that because thousands of people have confided their fears to me? It's that we'll end up alone. And that does happen. I know many of you watching this video are there right now wondering if any change is possible or if any change is worth it. And I just want to tell you yes and yes. You just start with one small action. You just show up, take a shower, put on your coat, and go say hello to some people. Go back to a group you used to like. Pay a visit to a friend you've been neglecting. Sign up for a litter cleanup day or a blood drive or whatever community get-together happens to show up in your community, and show up. If you do one thing like this every other day, in a couple of weeks, you'll find yourself included again. Now, the need to be included is not just a weakness, it's primal. We are born into community, and as much as we want to escape it sometimes and be independent, we never can be. It's not possible. And evolutionary biologists will tell you it's a survival strategy, so you have warmth and food and protection from predators and so on, but it's not just physical. Inclusion is just as important for the growth and development of your being, of your spirit. Because without inclusion in human relationships, the blossoming of your whole real self is arrested. It can't fully happen. So fulfillment can't come to us if we don't connect with people. It feels hard. It's okay. It is hard. I have to push myself all the time and probably always will. In my own case, I noticed that a lot of my isolating tendencies had a certain poisonous thought tucked inside of them, and the best way I can describe that is, I just want to be excused. The PTSD in me just doesn't want to be accountable to other people for no better reason than it's hard. So I face what's hard and I do it anyway. And the reward for that is that I get to be included. And being included is secretly exactly where we all want to be. So confusion plays a big role in why those of us with childhood PTSD struggle so often to perceive reality accurately. We get broadsided sometimes by things we should have been able to see coming from a mile away. And this is partly because our ability to process what's happening around us and respond to it appropriately is compromised a little, because that can get damaged by early trauma. But even worse, a lot of us got programmed as kids to second guess what was clearly happening right in front of us, or to us, right? Maybe we were being abused, or one of our parents was drunk a lot of the time and not coming home at night, or adults were doing things that were illegal. And it's sad, but kids will play along very easily with hiding this stuff from the world because from a very early age, we instinctively know we could be taken away from our parents, and we could be judged or excluded by our friends because of what's happening. And we have this strong drive not to let any of this happen. And that drive to preserve the status quo is so strong that we can forget what is the lie and what is actually true. And this is a great survival strategy when you're in a chaotic home and you're small, but then it carries into adulthood and we find ourselves with these giant holes in our clarity about what's really going on around us. You know, is my jealousy about my partner hanging out with an ex appropriate or crazy? Or is this conflict with my coworkers just me being difficult, or are they actually picking on me? When you have childhood PTSD, this stuff is totally confusing. You didn't get taught this at home. Plus, you're dealing with extra strong emotions, and sometimes they cloud the picture. And you're in the habit of second-guessing your reasoning processes. You're thinking, it seems like something isn't right here, but it's probably just me. So we live in confusion. And sadly, this leads to the kind of problems that caused us so much trouble in the first place. We feel ashamed and guilty, and even though we're not always sure why, we get back into hiding what's going on from other people, and sometimes even from ourselves. And that is a coping mechanism. It can get us through a hard time, but in the long run, it gives us a very high tolerance for crap, for unhappiness, for bad behavior in ourselves or in others. We get vague. We create cover stories to explain problems. We compartmentalize it. And the longer we do these things, the deeper the confusion works its way into our consciousness. So this is how we seemingly attract people who mistreat us. They treat us a little bit badly, and if we stick around and we assume it's just us and we keep everything looking good from the outside, they know they're free to ratchet it up, to mistreat us more. And it's the same thing with people who don't really mistreat us, but who let us down, who neglect us. They just act like themselves. They give very little, and if we're still around the next day telling ourselves that we're just being oversensitive, they get the signal that it's okay to neglect us and dump their responsibilities on us even more. So this is important. We don't attract them per se. We put up with them. And we don't leave because we're never sure if the hurt and disappointment that we feel is legitimate. Or we know they're mistreating us and we latch onto this idea that they should change. And that may be so, maybe they should change, but it doesn't mean they're going to change. And what do we do when they don't change? Not even a little bit. We go back to, maybe it's just me. But here's the really hard part about confusion. Sometimes when we're feeling mistreated, it is just us. It is. Sometimes it's just us. And childhood PTSD can make us really sensitive. We get triggered by some ordinary thing and our emotions go way out of the park. And sometimes we are unreasonable. And sometimes we're the ones who are neglectful or even hurtful or abusive even. Or we're in denial that something we did was wrong. If we're ever going to be functional and happy, we're going to have to develop the strength of discernment. Discernment means good judgment. It means being able to tell good from bad, right from wrong. When is it just me, or when should I get the heck away from someone? And there are two things we have to do to develop our discernment. One is to tell the truth. You've got to be honest with yourself. And when you're confused by something, you've got to say what's confusing and ask questions. Like, have you ever been out with someone and you thought, maybe it was a date, but you didn't know? Or you were invited to a restaurant, but you were nervous the whole time because you didn't know if you were expected to pay for your half of it or if they were treating you. Has this kind of ambiguous situation shown up for you over and over again? Or have you ever found yourself flirting with someone, but you knew that it was inappropriate, but you were afraid if you said something, it would ruin the moment? You know what you do? You just say out loud what's going on, or you ask. You say, this is weird. It feels kind of like things are getting a bit flirty here. Or you can ask, hey, when you invited me out, were you planning to treat, or should I plan to pay for myself? Or you can say, I'd love to go to dinner, and I hope you won't mind my asking, is this a date? It feels so embarrassing to ask the question or state the obvious, but you know what's so great about it? No more confusion. Whatever the situation is can be made clear to you, and you can proceed accordingly. How many times did you hide your feelings and not ask the question, or put up with crap and assume it was just you? And I just want you to think about this. If you were ever in a relationship where things turned out not to be what you thought, would it have changed things if you had said the truth of what you were noticing when you first noticed it? Saying the truth can really kill the romance sometimes. But when you're in a bad situation, that's what you want. You don't want a big delusion of romance. Because if truth ruins everything, something was already seriously not right. And speaking up early is also how you can clear up those piney relationships where you're pining away for someone who's very happy to be just friends. It's embarrassing to get rejected, but it's so much better to have it happen early and get it over with than to build your life around some unavailable person who just basks in your unconfessed devotion to them year after year. Okay, so this is what I mean by you having to be honest. The second thing you'll need to develop discernment is a process of self-reflection. And this is stuff that I teach in my Healing Childhood PTSD course and in my dating course. And if you like, you can check those out in the links below. But when you're working on this, it really helps if you've got at least one person to whom you can pour out your heart and who you can trust to be both kind and real with you about what they see from the outside, and supportive of you taking steps toward doing things in a better way. And this isn't always something we can get from friends because they're either too hard on us or they're too easy on us, and either way, it's not really helpful. But the bottom line is, no matter what other people did to cause confusion, the best thing to do is to focus on the part that we can change. Where was our discernment not so good? How could we build a workaround to alert us when that starts happening in the future? That's a lot of what I do with my coaching clients, for example, help them get out of the blame game and just see what can be changed and healed right now going forward. So yeah, sometimes to get out of confusion, we need a reality check. We do that by speaking up, asking questions, or getting input from someone we trust. And that's how we develop discernment. And discernment is how we come to have clarity. One that I want to talk about today that's a little hard to explain, but very connected to loneliness and isolation, is what I will call defendedness. It's a weird word, right? But what I mean is a kind of fragility that we get sometimes. We're fragile, right? Where we think we can't handle being around something that bothers us, so we try to control it. Like, we control other people by telling them what they can and can't say around us. Like, don't use that word. Or we make elaborate rules that we think we need other people to follow in our company, like, don't make jokes in front of my friends, or don't eat, I don't know, ham in front of me because it reminds me of this thing that upsets me. You know what I mean by fragile and controlling? Now, what we're trying to do when we're defended is not get triggered, right? Because for us, it's really costly to get triggered. We get all dysregulated, and we might lose hours or days in terms of the ability to function and focus. And that can seem like it makes sense because when we're triggered, it's hard to function, hard to be friendly, hard to go to work. So we get points for good intentions here. And you know what? Some people will play along with our rules, but trying to keep your PTSD brain regulated by controlling other people, it just never quite works. Defendedness is not a boundary, so don't confuse the two. Defendedness is an obstacle. It's a wall we put up. And we think we're blocking out triggers, but what we block out is basically everything, including surprises, including things that will help us grow, and especially we block out connection. So this is a long background talk about how we use defendedness to try to maintain some safety. But ultimately, defendedness makes us lonely. Now here's why defendedness was never going to make you safe. There's no safety because putting up walls only puts you in prison. You're never going to be able to make the world be just how you want it to be. So when are you ever going to be able to get out of that prison? The future? No. What you can do is calm the trigger. And this is what I teach in my Healing Childhood PTSD course. You can save all that energy that you're spending trying to control your environment and instead enjoy your life by simply growing more neutral to the things that used to upset you. Now, of course, I'm not saying that you should be neutral in the face of abuse. We don't tolerate abuse. We still get to say no to things and we walk away from what we don't want, but if we choose to stick around, we can be more open-minded and accepting that people are different. They're not all like us. They don't fit what we want, and that is absolutely okay. When you know that, and you're not so triggered by people having different opinions and wants and ways of expressing themselves, You'll become more appreciative of the goodness in most people, the wonder of them. And when you can start to shift into this less defended mode of interacting, life unfolds for you, and it reveals to you what you were looking for in the first place, which is connection and meaning. Now, I know these are the things that were taken from you when you were abused and neglected as a kid. And back then, staying safe meant defending yourself against people and life. But now, there is a way to be more open to it all, to love and be loved defenselessly, and still keep yourself intact and safe. There's a way. It has to be learned, but there's a way. And that is the strength that you're going to need to break through the walls you've put around yourself. You probably weren't expecting me to say that, but the strength is love. You, calm inside, with nice shiny boundaries, motivated by love for other people. I'm telling you, increase the love. Now, codependence is not love. Trying to make people love you is not love. Love is the energy that you bring to people you encounter in this day, no matter what's gone on for you in the past. And you can increase the love in the world in this way. And this is where your loneliness gets healed. You walk the path of love. 8 big obstacles to healing the effects of childhood trauma, as well as the strengths that we can develop to heal anyway. Now, by obstacles, I mean our own negative tendencies, and there's a pattern with childhood PTSD. Everyone's a little different, but you see these 8 obstacles crop up over and over again. And so the obstacle that I'm talking about today is a feeling of emptiness. Do you ever get that? Everyone feels it sometimes, but people with childhood PTSD are especially prone to it. It's one of the classic adult symptoms of early trauma. And like most trauma symptoms, it has roots in your brain development and in your psychological development. If you were hurt or ignored as a baby, there's an important part of your development, the connecting part, that may have had a setback, a neurological delay. And if you were abused or laughed at, constantly afraid, forced to hide your real thoughts and feelings, there was a whole lot of stuff that wasn't happening when you were a kid, when you were meant to be developing into a fully feeling, thinking, connected person. What wasn't happening? Maybe things like being held and unconditionally loved, or loved enough, or expressing yourself and getting a response, talking, laughing, making jokes, or doing something that showed a special talent that you have, right? We're meant to get that love shining at us so that we can know, like really know, that we belong in our family and we belong in this world. That's the ideal. And a lot of us had some funky version of that, or a really broken version of it. And I think that's a big source of the empty feeling. I think it's behind the really common fear that we're going to end up homeless. And I think it's a big reason people do become homeless, whether it's from wiring or conditioning. The connections that are supposed to come naturally just don't. Connection is hard, and with the way we grew up, in many ways, we don't actually fit in. I can tell you that the empty feeling that used to just seize me up before my own healing from childhood PTSD had a lot to do with the feeling of abandonment. Even when I didn't want to be connected to somebody, anything they did that felt like leaving would set off the terrible state that Pete Walker calls the abandonment melange, which he describes as the terrible emotional mix of fear and shame that coalesces around the death-like feelings of depression that afflict an abandoned child. Ugh. For me, feeling abandoned was just like that. I might not even like someone, but if they said, oh, I think this isn't working, it was really just a lot of fear, shame, and death-like feelings for me. So I'm here to give hope. I'm here to tell you, if I can heal from all of that, so can you. And I first had to learn to heal my brain, and then I learned to heal my thinking and my behavior that had gone off track because of my dysregulated brain. And it took me about 20 years. And if you're interested, you can go a lot faster than I did, because I put all of what I learned to do in a course, and I walk you step by step through the process. And the link for that is down below in the description section if you want to take that course. So you're going to hear me say in all my courses that when we get our brain and emotions more balanced, we're on a level playing field with people who never experienced trauma. But we're also in a position, for the first time perhaps, to do something extraordinary, and that is to develop our gifts. So what do I mean by gifts? I'm using an understanding that I learned from a mentor of mine whose name is Father Michael Sweeney, and some work he did at a place called the Siena Institute. He did a tremendous job of bringing the idea of spiritual gifts to people in a religious context. And I discerned my own gifts with his guidance, and over the years have found that virtually everyone, religious, spiritual, and atheist, instinctively understands the basic validity of this idea that gifts are unusual abilities with which we are endowed that came to us seemingly out of nowhere. Now, gifts are not exactly the same thing as talents. You might have a talent for playing the piano, and you play a certain piece so perfectly that people listening will say, "Wow, that was incredible. You didn't miss a single note." If a gift is at work, you'll know not by your technical expertise necessarily. In fact, if music is your gift, for example, you might not have learned to play anything yet, so you have no way of knowing what your gift is yet. But when a gift is operating in someone playing the piano, you'll know it by the effect it has on others. You may have a room full of listeners with just tears running down their cheeks. People will tell you how your work affected them. They might say, "I'm so moved by what you played." And if you're a teacher, for example, with a gift, your students might say, "You made me want to learn more. You made me want to be a better person." And have you ever met a doctor or a nurse who has technical expertise but no gift for healing? I have. And likewise, have you encountered someone who does have that gift of healing? There is something about them beyond their talent and knowledge that affects you. Now, that is what we mean by gifts. Some common gifts that you've probably noticed in others are healing, teaching, writing, music, art, wisdom, knowledge. Wisdom and knowledge are different. Encouragement, hospitality, leadership. There are more, but those are just some examples. And everyone has at least one gift, maybe two, maybe even three sometimes. And the reason gifts show themselves in the way we affect others is because they were given to us for the benefit of others. Not everything about us is for the benefit of others. Some things are just for survival, or some things are just fun hobbies. And though your gift might be something enjoyable to you, that's not necessarily how you find it. It also doesn't operate in a vacuum. Even when your gift is something that you only do all by yourself, it's something that ultimately benefits others, whether you know it or not. Now, you may not have found your gift yet. It's not always obvious what it is, or you may not be very good at it yet. But here's the thing. Everyone has a need to use their gifts in order to feel truly happy. Doesn't this resonate as something you've always known? You have gifts and you need to use them. And you may need to be around people with complementary gifts because some gifts are meant to work in tandem or in groups. People as a whole have many different gifts because how it works, it truly takes all kinds to bring about good in the world. But I'm talking to you about this in light of childhood PTSD because I think this is the great tragedy of child trauma. Something gets damaged, and among all the things that this damage will cost that child throughout her life, perhaps the worst is that it will suppress her gifts. And not only will this prevent her from feeling like herself or purposeful with all that she's capable of, but it will deny the rest of us the gift which she was meant to share with us, the art or the wisdom, the insight, whatever her gift is, that all people, all the world were meant to receive. It's like fabric. When we're all sharing our gifts, it's like a fabric, but it's still full of holes because of all the people who can't contribute yet because they're hungry, they're trapped in trauma, or in some way they're not free. So we need a context that lets us develop these gifts. Now imagine a world where everybody becomes fully their real selves and becomes able to share their gifts with all of us. And so this is what I believe. We heal from childhood PTSD, not just for the healing itself. The purpose of our healing is so that we can develop our gifts and share them. It's what we were made for. So we need to heal, and when we're healed, we need to find our gifts, and then we need to help create conditions where other people can heal and find their gifts. Now, this is no simple thing, but just as one person, you don't need to make the entire thing happen. You just need to bring your gifts into the world and discover the role that you were meant to play among many people in the unfolding of this wonderful world where somewhere in your heart you know is where you've always belonged. There is darkness out there, but through healing childhood PTSD, we bring light. We bring the light and we increase the love in the world. We increase the healing of what happened, healing towards something good that never even existed before. Something new comes through our healing. So let your love and your healing grow in you. Let it out. Let it spread back in time to love and heal those who suffered with childhood PTSD in the generations before us. Send your protective love and healing into the future to all the people who are here now and all the people yet to come. There will always be suffering, and there will always be those of us who understand because of our own suffering. And so let's be there for them, the ones who will feel alone, like we sometimes do. That's why we're here. This is why we heal from the past, for this purpose, to now bring love and light to all living things in this world. The obstacle I'm focusing on in this video is bitterness. Even when I say bitterness, it like tastes bitter almost, and it makes your face into a bitter face. Bitterness is something that comes at us from all directions, and sometimes it comes from inside, and it is poisonous. Bitterness is all over the internet, right? Including on some of the comments on my YouTube channel. You just don't see all of them because I just take those out so they don't hurt people. You probably know a few people who are stuck in bitterness, or I hope not, but maybe you are there yourself. So this is an obstacle to healing, and I want to talk about it. I'll remind you what bitterness looks like, how to know if you're doing it, and when we get to the part of the video where I talk about the strength that you'll need to overcome bitterness, I'll tell you my secret philosophy that's helped me get out of that bad place time and time again. So what bitterness is a frame of mind that some person or institution is bad, or people are stupid, or some category of people are bad and stupid or uncaring, and that the world is no good and people like me are their target. And you know what? There are times and places where for some people this is tragically all too true. We know from history that terrible things can happen. You may have heard me talk about some friends who survived a sudden attack in their town by hundreds of people who also lived in their town. The attackers came with knives, they trapped people in buildings and lit them on fire, and hundreds of people were killed. And these two families who are friends of mine survived, but in each of the families, one of their children was severely injured and went through literally years of hospitalization and painful treatments in burn centers, and eventually dozens of surgeries, all while the family could never go home again, had lost all their belongings, their businesses, their communities, and then in order to get better medical treatment for the kids, the families had to split up, and each child traveled with their mother to the United States. And the fathers and other siblings, they were young kids, they had to stay behind with no home or income. And they were separated for like 5 years. They had it hard. And if anyone might have turned bitter legitimately, it's these friends of mine. But they are anything but bitter. They hate what happened to them, and they've had to work hard to just deal with the reality that such evil could just spring up and destroy lives in this way. But you know what? Their hearts are full of love and gratitude. They are these solid, positive people who talk all the time about how to bring more good into the world. Now, these particular friends, their trauma is different maybe than mine or yours, and their lives in Kenya, it was no cakewalk, but the traumas never involved parents turning their backs on kids. Now, during tough times, their instinct was to help each other and stick together, not attack and blame each other. And these particular parents went over the top to go get their families back together and keep their kids feeling safe and loved and help them walk a positive path in life. It's been a huge blessing to me to know these families so that I could just learn firsthand how people can overcome terrible events that, God willing, I will never have to experience myself. I'm putting a link in the description section, by the way, to a book written by the father in one of those families about what happened and how they survived it. He's a really good man. He's a good dad. His name is Peter Mbuthia. And if you want to learn about his story, that link down there will take you to his book on Amazon. So my friends mitigated the effects of this terrible trauma through a very strong love and coherence around their families. That's not something I had growing up, and I know many of you didn't either. And when you don't have that, traumas a lot smaller than what they went through can do just as much damage. It can break down your body, it can break down your soul, and if you get stuck there either waiting for your family to change and give you that love, or getting stuck in bitterness that this love never seems to come, then healing can be impossible. So bitterness sometimes is better than despair because at least we're pointing it outside ourselves. But happiness can't exist alongside bitterness. And life has a tendency to get very, very small when we're bitter. I've had some periods of real bitterness about what happened in my family. And the fact that even after the crazy drama people are long gone, the surviving family members don't want to be in touch, or not with me anyway. And I couldn't really tell you why. Any way that I try to explain it ever, it just starts tipping over again into bitterness, and I don't want to go there. I mean, what's the point, right? And so fairly early on in my healing process, I made a decision to let go of the ideal picture of how they should be. They should be proud of me. They should stay in touch. They should appreciate how far I've come. And it's all true on one level, but it's not true. It's just not how things are. And me being wrapped up in that dynamic was keeping me from enjoying all kinds of goodness that was around me, even when my life was hard and I was mostly alone in the world. When you open up to appreciate the good, it changes you in that moment. You're open. People find something lovely in you, and they are drawn to you. And a bitter person is more like a locked door. You want people to come in, but they can't. So sometimes things are so hard that you can't open the door. And yet we need to open the door, even when it's scary, to allow in the good. And if you can't do it today, then set your sights on it. Keep trying. And as soon as you can, starting with little things, exchange your bitterness for the acknowledgement of the good that is already in your life. When I was in Kenya, I went to towns where the roads were made of this slippery mud, and driving and walking it was almost impossible. You took your life into your hands. So I started with asphalt. I am so grateful to live where there are paved roads and clean water and nobody trying to burn my house down. I imagine some of you want to set me straight and tell me that your case is worse and I don't understand, but I'm telling you, no matter what has happened in the past, you always have the power to do this, even only a little bit, to just bring your attention back to what is good. Not everything is good, I know that, but start with one thing that is good and experience just a little bit of ease as you let that in. Now remember, being grateful doesn't mean you put up with abuse or accept unacceptable situations. But if you're going to be protected from harm, you're going to need strength. And part of where that comes from is to know what's good. And if you keep seeking out and appreciating what's good, you eventually become a connoisseur. So choosing bitterness, on the other hand, that makes you all too good at noticing what's wrong. And then the abuser has won. We don't have to let that happen, not so long as we're above ground and able to see and hear and notice good. Now, you might feel scared or resistant to losing your bitterness, like it's some kind of protection from disappointment or from people trying to take advantage of you. And in this case, I'll point you to all the other videos in this resilience series about how to deal with all the complications of being open to experience in life. Now, just in case you're thinking, this is all easy for you to say, Anna, you don't know what I went through, I'd say first, it was worse for me than I talk about in these videos. And B, who cares? We still are all in need of healing. Me too. One little thing sets me off and bang, I'm back in that bitterness thinking that everyone is doing this to me. But I know the drill. I notice it's happening. I stop. I use my tools to release all that extra emotion and bring my reasoning mind back online so I can think and feel and see reality. Reality is great because when you can see it, you can decide what to do. And this is something I talk about and I teach you how to do in the Healing Childhood PTSD course. And if that's something you want to learn, there's a link below where you can get all the details and register right now if you want. I'd love to have you in the course, or even better, in the membership program I run, and there's a link for that down there too. You get access to all my courses. So if you're feeling bitter and you're ready, when you develop the strength we call gratitude, what fills your life is hope. Not just, oh, I hope I don't end up alone all my life, but a total and permeating sense of hope that whatever happens, you'll figure out what to do. You are needed here in this world. Your love, your gifts are making a difference here, and we need more of that. We need you. So be brave with your healing and with your heart, because I promise when your childhood PTSD gets better, everything is possible.